Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robin George, and I'm a Heritage Officer within the South African Heritage Resources Agency. The time is now 10 o'clock, and I would like to welcome you to our day 2 of our annual SARA Heritage Webinar Week. So with that being said, we are going to now have just a word of opening and welcome from our CEO, Ms. Lungisa Malgas.
Speakers, honored guests, and all participants joining us from across South Africa and beyond. It is my great privilege on behalf of South African Heritage Resources Agency to welcome you to our annual Heritage Month webinar taking place from the 16th to the 19th of September 2025. This year, our gathering is guided by the theme, Resilient Heritage, Safeguarding South Africa's Legacy in a Changing Climate, aligned with G20 priority focus on climate change and disaster risk management. This theme could not be more timely. Across the globe, and indeed here at home, we are witnessing the devastating impacts of climate change. Floods, droughts, fires, and rising sea levels that threaten not only our environment, but also cultural and historical fabric that connects us to our past and shapes our identity. Heritage is more than monuments, archives, or landscapes. It is also the living traditions, practices, and stories passed from generation to generation. As climate change accelerates, so too does the risk of losing irreplaceable heritage, particularly in vulnerable communities. This calls for urgent action, innovative solutions, and inclusive approaches to ensure that our shared legacy is protected for future generations. Over the next 4 days, this webinar will take us on a journey. We will begin by understanding the threats of our heritage faces in changing climate. We will then turn to the role of disaster risk management and explore the policies and practices needed to safeguard heritage during times of crisis. We will listen to the voices of our heritage community, our custodians of knowledge and resilience, who remind us that climate justice must also be cultural justice. And finally, we will look forward exploring how technology, innovation, and sustainable practices can help us adapt and build resilience for the future. I wish to extend my deepest gratitude to our partners, speakers, and participants who have joined us in this important dialogue. Your insights, your expertise, and your commitment are vital to advancing the protection of our heritage in the face of climate emergency. As we reflect, engage, and share over the coming days, let us be guided by a simple truth. Heritage is not a luxury, but necessity. It grounds us, unites us, and lights the way forward. Even in times of uncertainty, together, we can ensure that South Africa's heritage not only survives, but thrives as a source of resilience and inspiration for generations to come. I thank you, and I look forward to the rich discussions that lie ahead. And at this point, I would like to introduce my newly appointed chairperson of SARA, Ms. Elodie Tlwaele.
Heritage. It is an honor to join you today as we open the South African Heritage Resources Agency's annual Heritage Month webinar, held from the 16th to the 19th diversity and the promise of our future. This year's commemoration carries special significance as we situate our discussions within the global context of the G20 theme, which is climate change and disaster risk management. Heritage Month reminds us that heritage is not just about memory, it's about continuity. It is about ensuring that the cultural, historical, and spiritual treasures that have been entrusted to us are safeguarded against the challenges of our time, chief among them being the existential threat of climate change. South Africa is both blessed and challenged in this regard. We are blessed with heritage of extraordinary richness, from iconic archaeological sites and battlefields to sacred landscapes, built environments, and vibrant living traditions. Yet we're challenged by the growing risks of floods, droughts, fires, and rising seas, forces that threaten not only our environment, but also the places, practices, and identities that define who we are. As chairperson of SARA, I believe that this Heritage Month calls on us to renew our commitment to stewardship. We must embrace both local knowledge and global frameworks. We must align our efforts with the priorities of the G20, while ensuring that South Africa's voice is strong, rooted in our realities, and reflective of our communities. In doing so, we affirm and protect the protection of our heritage in inseparable form. We affirm that the protection of heritage is inseparable from the pursuit of sustainability, resilience, and justice. Over the next 4 days, we will explore together how heritage can be protected in the face of climate change, how communities can lead in building resilience, and how innovation can light a way forward. These conversations are not theoretical. They're essential. So without action, we risk losing the very legacy that binds us together as South Africans and as part of the global community. So on behalf of the South African Heritage Resources Agency, SARA, I thank you all for joining us during this Heritage Month. Let us use this moment not only to celebrate our heritage, but also to safeguard it so that generations yet to come may inherit a legacy of strength, of resilience, and pride. I wish you fruitful deliberations and a very, very successful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our CEO, Ms. Advocate, I beg your pardon, Lungisa Malgas, and also our newly elected SARA Council Chairperson, Ms. Elodie Toale, for that. And with the next person is Mama Komoreng Nkasi Lesoana, who is our Executive of Heritage Resources Management. She'll now also do her section. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to the CEO. Good morning to our guests. Ben, I don't know who we have in the audience, but we do appreciate the attendance today. It is one of the series that we have every year that now our Heritage Week webinar has become a norm within SARA. And I think, Ben, this is our 4th year, but every year feels like the first year every time. And so as we embark on this week, what we are doing as Heritage with the rest of the heritage sector is to try and remember, when I will give an example of the developers with the communities, where there may be a disagreement, the last resort that the communities always go to is heritage. And one wonders that, when everything almost fails, you remember your roots, you remember who you are. And so Heritage Week and Heritage Month within South Africa, I think it is that time when we take a pause and try to remember our cultures, and within South Africa, very diverse cultures. And this week, the SARA team has worked very hard to try and get us in these reflections in various days with various themes within which our guests will engage in conversations with the participants for us to understand the broad spectrum of heritage management within the context of how heritage is impacted today in times of disasters, in times of climate change. And so as we look for the tools, as we explore where we are at, we really call upon your engagements all, that we may come at the end of the fourth day, that we will come up with the solutions and the tools that can benefit heritage resources management, better promotion and better conservation and protection of the heritage resources. And so my task, as I've been asked here, is really to say, engage thoroughly as much as possible to a degree that we will be able to come up with the solutions. We thank you for your time over the forthcoming days, and we are looking forward to really open, engaging discussions.
Thank you very much to our speakers that has set the tone and that has given us the information that we need. So, ladies and gentlemen, if I may say this is our Heritage Webinar Week, and yes, it is hosted by SARA, but we also do need your inputs. Let's make this a conversation. Let's make this engaging so that we can learn from each other, that we can share information, and that we can also improve and grow the heritage sector. So now I will do a recap of what was done yesterday, just to refresh our memories. Yesterday's topic focused on heritage at risk, the climate crisis, and our cultural legacy. So yesterday in the discussions, what was unpacked was the science and the lived realities of climate-induced risk to both tangible as well as intangible heritage. And then also it was yesterday set the tone for us and the stage for understanding why urgent climate change action is critical and is also needed to safeguard our cultural legacy. So our presentations that we did yesterday focused on climate change threats to South Africa's heritage landscapes. It focused on a case study pertaining to the Tatham Gallery disaster, and also the performance of heritage materials. And then a specific case study was given for the building that I'm currently seated in, the Castle of Guru, which is also the oldest building in the Republic of South Africa, and also one of our national heritage sites. So today what we will do is, the topic is disaster risk management in the heritage sector from policy to practice. So we will then discuss effective disaster risk preparedness, and then we will focus on different heritage institutions, local governments, as well as communities and their role within this process of disaster risk reduction and then frameworks pertaining to it. We will then turn our attention to emergency planning, legislative gaps, interagency coordination, and then also focusing on strategies pertaining to floods, fires, and other natural natural disasters. So the day offers a platform thus to strengthening policy planning as well as heritage responses. So if I can take this opportunity, our first speaker is Professor Lochner Mare. Professor, are you on the line?
I am.
Okay, yes, Professor, good morning to you, and thanks for joining us. I do acknowledge we are a few moments early, or a few minutes early, should I say. Are you ready to go, or do you still need a few more minutes?
I always prefer being early, so that would be fine.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. It's good to see you on the screen. So, Professor Lochner is a professor at the University of the Free State, and he's based within the Center for Development Support. And the topic that you will be presenting on, I'm not here to steal shine, is pertaining to the Jagersfontein pit disaster. So Prof, if you're ready, please do take us away and just capture all the audience, as we are very, very keen to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to confirm you can hear me and you can see the slides.
Yes, Prof, on our side perfectly clear. We can hear and see.
Just give me 10 seconds. All right, so I was asked to do this presentation on the tailings failure, or the pit disaster, or however you want to talk about it. The point is, there is a paper available on this, and although I'm doing the presentation, it has been a collaborative arrangement with several people at my university and with the University of Queensland in Australia, where we participated in a global project on tailings and tailing failures in the mining environment. All right, so there will be 5 simple points and 1 point of reflection that I'll come back to, but the one is about transparency in disaster management. The second one is about failure versus disaster. How do we think about tailings, and there's a tendency to think about failure rather than disaster. You will, through the conversation, see the value of history. In the process, there will be some reflections on accountability and the question, how do we learn from disasters? Finally, I'll try and reflect on some issues around social performance as well. So, yeah, sort of the question is, what is a disaster? So one of the more prominent people in disaster risk management talks about disasters occur at the interface of society, technology, and environment. And the environment and are basically the outcome of the interactions of these features. Choices made over time are consequential for understanding how disasters occur. So we need to, disasters don't occur one day for the mere fact that there's lots of rain or earthquake. It's often, the disaster is often linked into history in a very significant way, and part of my presentation will reflect on that. I think it's important just to say a couple of words about tailing failures. So the first point is that mining creates lots of waste. So in very rough terms, there's about, when you mine, you use about 1% of what you take out of the ground. The other 90% you need to restore somewhere else. And the one way to restore this is through tailings facilities, tailing storage facilities, which, by the way, generally are some of the, or is the largest man-made structures are tailing facilities. However, these things do fail, and since 1950 there were just above 250 tailing failures, destroying about 5,000 square kilometers, killing 2,500 people, displacing 350,000 people, and globally, the reason, or the global example these days is the Brumadinho case, where over 100 people died, and this led to a review of tailings management across the world by the ICMM, and they have come up with strengthened technical requirements in terms of GISTM. The question is, has this gone far enough in the process? And I'll come back to some of those issues. All right, so that's sort of the global picture. If we go to Jagersfontein, when this happened on 11 September 2022, 3 people died, 1,600 hectares of land was occupied by the sludge, and about 6 million cubic meters of sludge left tailing dam, with about 200 houses being affected in Jagersfontein itself. So our research process is we've gone through quite a length to document the history of the town and certain processes through archival work. We also did some 60 interviews at the stage when we did this paper. We've continued doing some work around long-term recovery, which is not part of what I'm going to discuss today, but there's some more work going on. We spoke to about 40 survivors and community respondents, or first respondents in this case. And in fact, there is a very nice video that we made that's publicly available if you Google that on the internet. So I've referred to this as part of an international project. And we tried to think a little bit about what we got from the interviews and how that related to the archive. So there was always this interlink between our interviews and archival work to and fro, and some of that I'll show in the course of the presentation. I suppose that's not very visible on your side, but it is on the slides, which will be available afterwards. It gives you sort of a time frame of what happens over since 1869, when the first diamonds are discovered. And there's basically 4 processes that you need to, or 4 periods you need to understand. The one is sort of a process of open digging, community digging, a little bit of commercial work towards the end of this period. But that's sort of the first 70 years from 80 years from 1870 to about 1950. And then in 1950, De Beers started with a real hardcore commercial operations, which they closed in 1972. So this is 72 is a very important point in this process. De Beers then closes the mine in 72, and then it's dormant. No mining takes place. It's dormant up till 2011, when it sells it off to a new mining company, which at that point only mines existing mining dumps. No underground mining, no new mining, and I'll come back to that reality. And that's where the disaster then develops. There is a tailing facility that De Beers developed in the period between 1950 and 1972. That has been largely stabilized by 72, and then the new mining creates new tailings. So it's old waste dumps that are mined, and these dumps are they get replaced, okay? Because you now only take 1% of those dumps. You need to get rid of the other 99% in the process. So we're going to go through 6 themes: economic change, technological change, social geography, liability, disaster, risk, transparency, and consent. Maybe just to start off, before we go into these themes, to give you sort of just an overview of how this looks from the air. So the little yellow dots, mostly towards the left of your picture, are these waste dumps that are being mined. Okay, so these are the old waste dumps. What basically happened was, in the olden days, in the 20s, they laid out the ore onto the land. They wet it, and they hoped it broke up, and they got the diamonds in that way. But of course, you didn't get all the diamonds, and the waste were then collated in these waste dumps, these yellow dots on the left. Towards the middle, you can see the tailings facility. There's a yellow line. That's the tailing facility in just before failure. There's a red angle there that you need to, or red nearly square inside the yellow bit. That's the original tailings facility from De Beers, which they left in 72. Of course, they put the walls up higher, and they filled more tailings into this system. Okay, and then you need to see the old town of Jagersfontein is towards the north, the upper end of the figure, and then the Itumeleng township goes down towards the right. And that's the Itumeleng township is the original black township in the area. And then the area of Scotty is a very important area, gets affected by the disaster, and I'll say more about the history of Scotty in a couple of slides. It's all been an extension of the township. On the more southern part, you will see Charlesville. That's the historical company town, the company housing created by De Beers after 1949 in the process. The other point that I want to show, and you can see on the bottom two slides, you can see how this affected both Charlesville, first Charlesville and Scotty, how they affected. The other point that I want to make, and I'm not sure you can follow this, my arrow, but the red lines, or the red square, the red piece inside, the left line there were lines created in the 1930s. It was like a wall that was created, and the tailings were dumped on the right-hand side of that wall. And that wall became the wall of the tailings facility later on in the 50s and 60s. All right, so this is just, and my apologies, I didn't put in 2024, but this is how it looked before the disaster on the left-hand side, then as the disaster happened, and then a year later, after the disaster, there's been a fair amount of cleanup, but I suspect you still will have some kind of moon landscape if you look through this process. All right, so I've spoken about these 6 themes. Maybe it's important just to reiterate the first time period is private diggings, and then internationalization, more people from outside coming in. You can understand that it was the Free State Provincial Government, or not Free State Provincial, the Orange Free State Republic tried to keep this in-house in that period. And then international people got to know about this, and that created larger productivity as well as the creation of companies. So the new Jagersfontein company was established in 1890. And there's some boardroom politics. De Beers getting their people also appointed on the board of New Jagersfontein, and they could tell to keep the diamond prices high. They could curtail initial production in Jagersfontein. Of course, the 1930s, the Great Depression, the mine closes, and New Jagersfontein company become part of De Beers in 1932. So effectively, De Beers became the company secretary at that point. Then since 49, De Beers started mining the mine for its own account. They don't mine it under New Jagersfontein anymore. Unprecedented growth in diamond demands, or in the diamond demand worldwide, and about 2,500 people employed. And by 1971, De Beers is the full owner of the mine. It's not New Jagersfontein company anymore. Then in 2011, De Beers sell to Super Kulong. Super Kulong forms Jagersfontein Developments with net investments, and early in 2022, net investment sells their 50% share to Star Diamond, which is based in Dubai, if I remember correctly now, and they employ about 200 people. And these are the people that only mine the dumps at this point. All right, we need to understand something about technology, production, and waste. So initial process is very slow. It increases when there's internationalization, the forming of mining companies. So it's not individual diggers anymore. And it's surface mining up till 1914. And then since 1914, they go underground. There's various washing machines to try and improve production. and this this creates the this increased in production creates the waste dumps that we now looking at being mined since 2011. Then since 1949, high level industrial production, underground steam engines, and they create sort of tailings dam already visible in some of the aerial photographs before 49 and on maps as well. All right, the issue then is that the new mining in phases 4 and 5 is largely based on new technologies. So what they do is like they water the gravel again, and they put it through an sort of X-ray system to pick up the diamonds. But it creates wet tailings because you also need to water. You need to water the stuff that goes through these so-called X-rays. Not really X-rays, but that's the best description I can give. And that creates wet tailings. It creates water that you need to get rid of, and you need to displace these waste dumps to another place in the process. All right, we need to understand something about social geography of this place. So initially, the farm is owned by a Griqua person called Mr. Jagers, and that's where the name comes from as well. This is sold in about 1850, my apologies, to Mr. Visser. He dies. Mrs. Visser becomes the owner of the farm, and she sells the farm and the town in the late 1870s, early 1880s to New Jagersfontein Company. It's declared public diggings in 1871, and a town was created in 1882. So this was unprecedented in the Free State because there were about 9 or 10 towns at the time. And to create a new town just 14 kilometers away from Fort Smith was absolutely new. It was a way of trying to say we don't want to be associated with this mining environment, and therefore we'll create a new town that we don't integrate it into Fort Smith. There's municipal status in 1906, and there's, like in most mining areas, there's a compound for black workers. Cape stands created in the first part, what is today known as Itumeleng. And in 1944, there's a process of normalization. So what happened when New Jagersfontein Company bought the farm and the town from Mrs. Visser, they became the town manager. The company was the town manager, and normalization means this now becomes public land and a public management system. You can actually own, people can own land. It's not mine owned, and that happens in 1944 in Jagersfontein, long before the term normalization was created anyway. But then in the period since 1949, 1950, De Beers create Charlesville. And when the mine closes in 72, the question is, what do you do with Charlesville? And they donate, after various options, they donate this to the Department of Social Welfare at the point, who settle sub-economic poor white people in that area. And that was sort of common. There are a couple of other examples in South Africa where this was done at that point. Of course, what happens since 1994 is that this privileged position of poor white people disappears, and many of them leave, and the place largely normalizes as well, in the sense that there's opportunities for private ownership. In the process, it needs to be, and you need to pay your bills to the municipality. There's another important piece of information, and that is that in 1973, land transaction takes place. So De Beers sells the piece of land where Scotty is to the municipality in 1973. On request of the municipality, this piece of land is sold off to the municipality to deal with increased urbanization at that point. It's largely done in the little bit of documentation we have is largely done as a way that the town did had some land to the north, but that was not part of the apartheid planning system of the time to put black people in that area north of the town, and that's why they advocate for this piece of land towards the eastern part of Jagersfontein. However, selling this land had this clause on, and it basically says that if something happens if there's some risk to the tailing, if something happens to the tailing facility that affects this piece of land, then the owners of this land would have would not be able to sue for negligence. Okay, so it's a type of the mining company trying to protect its assets and shift the liability to individuals. We find this in when people show us their title deeds, and this clause has been transferred to every title deed in Scotty on this piece of land over the years. Of course, the mine didn't do much about this. Rightfully didn't take up this clause and did try to in the recovery response, which is actually very weak, but they didn't discriminate against people because of this clause. The other point is that it's probably constitutionally will not stand the Constitutional Court ruling on this in any way. All right, then there's issues about law and court. So there's in the early 2000s with the MPRDA, there's a change in South African mining legislation, which meant and every mine needs to apply for new order rights. Remember, this is 2004. The mine has been closed for nearly 30 years, a bit more than 30 years. It still belongs to the Beers. The old order right is still the Beers right. They also own the land at that point. They do not apply for a new order right. And the department, whatever, and I can't always remember the names of how this department's name has changed, but the Department of Minerals at that point don't provide a license to De Beers, but give it to a small firm, and De Beers take the department to court. There are two legal questions in this whole court application. The one question is whether diamonds in the tailings are diamonds or minerals for the interpretation of the MPRDA. So the question is, are these dumps? So if you think, let's think about it. If you sell your house and you sell, there's a heap of soil somewhere, can you take it with, or do you leave it behind? That's effectively the question. You need to understand how the court ruled on this. So the question is, are these diamonds minerals? Okay, if they in a dump and not under the ground, and then who own these dumps? Can you remove these dumps as movable assets, or are they fixed assets on the property? So you can't move the house when you sell your property, but you might move your furniture. So the question is this furniture or is this the house, if you think about the minerals? All right, maybe just to say that the MPRDA defines minerals as any substance, whether in solid, liquid, or gaseous form, occurring naturally in or on the earth or under the water, and minerals occurring in residue stockpiles and residue deposits. It doesn't talk about waste dumps by words. So then the court ruling comes. Diamonds in waste dumps are distinguishable and removable without inquiry, without injury to the land. Therefore, they're movable assets, and De Beers is the owner of these movable assets. Of course, there's a counter opinion in the literature that questions this logic. And the main problem is that residue stockpiles and residue deposits are not equated to previous pieces of legislation on waste dumps and to the Minerals Act in 1991. So what are the implications of this reality? Is that it's not a mining operation. It falls under dam legislation. They don't need to provide a social and labor plan, and this leads to several community protests in allocating in De Beers remaining the owner at that point. And as mentioned, De Beers then sells this off to Super Kulong in 2010, 2011 after the court case, and the new mining operation starts. There are issues about this transparency and consent. So there's a long discussion about the mine wanting to backfill the pit with the tailings. And they try various consultants, various processes in that process, and the community virtually just tells them no. One of the reasons they want to do it, of course, that they don't need to spend the money in building tailings. And the second thing is that the pit is breaking back, and they argue that if you backfill the pit, you would be able to stabilize the pit. But of course, they don't get any community consent. There were various attempts. The last attempt was about just filling it at 30 meters from the top, because they had to pay that off against 100 million new investment in tailings facilities. So the point here that I think we need to think of is the fact that filling up the pit, which is a heritage site, required lots of local consent. However, building and expanding the existing dam did not require community consent. It required complying to legislation, which apparently they didn't, but it didn't comply building a new tailings facility didn't require community consent at that point. Okay, then there's the level of warnings from the Department of Water Affairs. They take away the dam license. There's warnings from the main engineering firm. They get a report from a second engineering firm that says that the dam is safe. The Department of Water Affairs gives the license back in 2021, and on 11 September 2022, the dam fails catastrophically in the area. And ironically, the director for regional director, after the failure, allows the mine to dump their tailings into the pit without any community consent at that point. So it's formal authorization to backfill the pit. There's no guidance on the structural stability. After nearly 10 years of seeking consent to fill the pit, it was the disaster that enabled this practice without community consent. The mine reopened 6 months after disaster and now dumps this into the pit. So if we think a little bit about social performance in the process, so there are mixed experiences. On the one hand, there's the absence of a local government. So the mine is sometimes seen as local government, providing water, having water tanks out there, and to some degree the mine, despite the local opposition, has been sort of the local government to a large degree. However, they've got very little capacity to deal with community concerns. It's very reactive. Something goes wrong, and then they respond. So there's no social capability to deal with the complexity. And of course, because it's not a mining operation, they're actually not required to do that. So there's very little transparency in thinking about when you build up this tailings dam that it might fail, and that you need to think about disaster plan in the process. Very little consideration, both at local and district government and in the mine. Very little thinking about this reality. All right, a couple of concluding comments, and I see I've got 2 minutes left. So on the one hand, we very quickly in this country think about mining as something benefiting, but we don't always understand the long-term risk of. So what was beneficial to many people and many companies in 1870 and 1880, and as you go on, lots of people was employed, became a risk in the long term. Now, various decisions over time that leads to the disaster. All right, so and none of these are legal or illegal per se, but you could have prevented the disaster by damaging the heritage site, which is the pit, and you could have created other disasters in that process. So there's you need to try and understand. You need to play off how decisions we make today affect potential disasters tomorrow. There are examples of various land decisions. I mean, the Scotty example is the worst of them all, and how you put people into a place which is sort of in the waterway, and a logical flow of any water would affect them. There are, of course, issues around core decisions in the process, and the question is whether that core decision in 2007, 2008 was the most appropriate, and maybe it's the MPRDA not linking certain concepts in the MPRDA with the 1991 Minerals Act. Maybe that was also a problem. Community decisions, you probably got that. There's the lack of consent for the dam, high levels of consent needed to backfill the pit, which is not given, and that of course is also, you need to understand the conflict in that reality. I think we need to carefully think about how we close mines, and what that means, because I think remining in this case has created major risks, and the risk is that you just relocating the waste, and what was sort of stable now becomes unstable in the process, and that's probably the remining of waste, and how we think about that in legislation, but also in practice, is problematic, despite the fact that technology allows us to actually do that. Chairperson, thank you so much. I'm quite happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that very insightful presentation. Yeah, I was listening to it, and I mean, I took in by myself just some of the things that happened. It seems like many people impacted by this disaster, and there's obviously a lot still happening and going on to rectify, if I may use the word, and to improve the situation there. Is there any questions from the floor, firstly? Or are we still thinking about things? Let's see if there's any. Yeah, there is just, Professor, there is a request to obviously have the presentation from you, as there are some people that are interested in going through it, and maybe for other purposes. I did make some notes, so maybe I can give our audience just a bit of time to think. Oh, I see there's a hand. Sorry. Okay. Olinda Mafika. Olinda Mafika, you can go ahead. You are recognized.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I am Olinda Mafika from Eco Elementum. Firstly, thank you, Prof, for your presentation. I do not necessarily have a question, more of a comment. I fully agree with your conclusion and the points that you've raised in terms of rethinking how we close mines and how we interact with the community in terms of making such decisions. I have the privilege of being the stakeholder specialist here at Eco Elementum. So engaging with communities is something that I do on a regular basis. I also just wanted to comment that I think legislation needs to, especially from DMRE, DWS, and the other commenting authorities, there needs to be the inclusion of the global industry standard on tailings management, especially when we're looking towards closing certain mines and how we go about that. And there also needs to be an enforcement of the principles that are related to GISTM. And I think that would help in the long run, especially when it comes to the fact that stakeholder engagement is something that's overlooked frequently, and also on how effective the stakeholder management practices that are offered by various mines is done. So that's just the comment that I have. But thank you for the presentation.
George, can I make 2 comments about it? 1 or 2 comments?
Yes,
Yeah,
Professor, you
so
can go
I
ahead.
just want to reflect on the GISTM. I think it's very important what Rolinda has said, because let's assume. So let me first say what the problem is. The problem with the GISTM is it's only applicable to enforceable to ICMM members. That's 24 mining companies across the world. Of course, it could be voluntary used elsewhere, but it's not a country level thing, and it's only applicable to 24 mining companies effectively. However, the point I want to make is if we had some of those principles in the GISTM in this case, you would have had a risk assessment of the dam shared with the community. You would have had an emergency response plan with the community. They would have known what early warning signals would be. So in our interviews, we found lots of people hearing funny sounds like helicopters or trucks or whatever. You would have known what you would have had in a WhatsApp group where warnings would have been given, and the 3 people. So there's only 3 people died, but if that disaster took place an hour earlier, that would have been very close to 20 in my estimation. The fact that it was starting to get light in the morning made a difference. So you could have had, if you complied all the GISTM principles, you could have had an early warning system. You could have evacuated people at least an hour beforehand. You could have evacuated people to safety. Of course, you will always find stubborn people that would not move in the process, but you would have practiced this. You would have known what to do. You would have had people going in and out of houses, making sure that people get out without any concerns, etc. So of course, the GISTM, despite still some concerns of not going far enough in my mind, does provide a very good example of how we can deal with these things a bit more rational. And one of it is being transparent about risk. And it's as simple as like when we get in an aeroplane, there's lots of transparency and risk. We've been told if the plane goes down, this is what you should do. Of course, in reality, very few people will be able to do what we're told to do. Yet there's transparency of risk. That's an example of how risk is very transparently explained to people. And we should also be able to do this in tailings facilities across the country. Sorry, George, I went a little bit longer than what I should.
No, Professor, thank you very much. It's all good engagement, and we welcome this. I mean, I don't want to just hear my own voice. And yeah, we actually encourage the debate and the discussion. So I actually have some questions to you myself. And maybe you have some answers to it, maybe not. Maybe it's just something to think about. Maybe there's some of the fellows or the persons from the industry or the sector that's here that could even maybe take some of these up. Who knows? So I'll just pose them. So it's 3 questions. My first one is, what efforts were implemented to retrieve and to restore any heritage objects and sites there in and around the dam or in the area after the disaster, I beg your pardon? And then my next one is, what is being done now to make structures as such, the dam obviously, more climate resilient? And then I also have another one, and I think you might like this one as an academic. What research topics do you recommend which will tie together or bring together, should I ask, heritage resource management, mining, as well as disaster risk management? Thank you.
Yeah, that's maybe the more difficult one. Let me start with the other stuff. So I can't talk on the first question with lots of authority, but here's my impression or impressions, and that there was very little of the heritage issues affected, except the pit. Okay, so the pit has now been backfilled with the tailings because of the disaster. All right. The other heritage sites, and I might be wrong, but I don't think it affected any of them significantly. There's some buildings in town. There are some artifacts around that, but that's more to the western and the northern side. But I could be wrong. It's not something that I know exactly. But here's the point. It's the pit. Of course, it's a heritage site. The question is there any economic value to that? And the community always said that it's not just the economic value, but the heritage of remembering that this is important to us, and therefore you can't backfill it. All right. And now the disaster means we haven't listened to anybody. It's now a bureaucratic process in backfilling it. And I think that's that part of the question as far as I can answer it. Sorry, your second question was about structured dam.
Resilience, yeah. Making it more resilient. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So remember, this location is not great. Okay, there's not lots of traffic going through there. So you always sit with some historic buildings, artifacts, and the pit. And how to take that to the next level will require lots and lots of resources, which I don't think we have. So I'm sorry, I don't have easy answers to that reality. And of course, you are damaging the pit now in your own way. So research topics, so I could talk. So my field is not heritage work. So I mean, this Jagersfontein has got some heritage link, but my field is not heritage work. So it's very difficult for me to think about the heritage work per se. And I know that's more what you want, but I think around there's lots of work to be done around tailings management, and not on the technical stuff. Okay, so the technical stuff largely is not the only problem. Okay, so there are technical problems. Of course, the failure, the technical reason for the failure is not complying to legislation on dams. That's effectively why people are on court today, and that's why technically failed. I think the issues, as the first person that asked questions said, is how do we involve communities in these processes around risks and risk management. Are there risk plans in place to deal with it? And of course, I've got two students now, one working just on the early warning systems that were largely ignored, and the other one looking at people that looked at their own livelihoods and recovery. So they're looking at how you recover your own livelihood. So there's lots of work to be done in disasters around recovery. And my impression is it's largely people that are self-employed. Okay, and when I talk self-employed in Jagersfontein, it's I have a welding machine and I do some welding work, or I have an oven and a garden and I bake and I sell. All right, and these people just overnight, within one day, they lose everything, and the recovery process actually means that you don't get it back. Okay, for good and bad reasons. These people haven't got back what they had. They got their houses back, but they don't get the equipment that kept them alive. They don't get that back in any significant way. So there's lots of recovery work. I suppose the link, and maybe that's the purpose of your 4-day stuff, is to also think about how disaster and heritage are affected one another. But it's, as I said, I'm not. My main work is not on heritage stuff, although I have got 1 or 2 students working on some issues on this as well.
Thank
Sorry,
you
George, I
very
can't answer all your difficult questions.
No. Thank you, Professor. Yeah, it's good to obviously have the insights. I mean, nobody knows all the answers to everything, I suppose. And at least with a platform like this and with the engagement that we are currently having, we're able to bring this, I mean, from disaster risk, from heritage, from community engagement, etc. And then that's actually how you come up with a greater sustainable method and a solution, because I suppose nothing is in isolation. So yes, there is also from the chat, Mr. Martin Albertus. If I can, I'll just read it out. So his comment is that would be interesting to hear how this particular incident is shaping how the mining industry, local government, national departments are shaping future planning and adaptation responses in respect of disaster risk. Are we learning, reflecting, and improving as a collective? And then also Mr. Albertus mentions there, it's not a question, but rather a reflection given this insightful presentation. And I suppose it ties very much in with what I was saying now, that you can't look at things in isolation. A disaster happens, no one's just going to jump up and say, oh, we need to look after the heritage only, or oh, we need to look after, I don't know, the livelihoods or the farming techniques, etc. But you look at it as a holistic perspective, because, I mean, everything is basically impacted. And I suppose from our side, as the South African Heritage Resource Agency, we are obviously governed by this document, which is the NARA. So that's where we come in. And like I said, the intention is to obviously to bring our mandate forward, and then also to listen to what's happening out there within the sector and who's saying what, how can different parties or entities get involved, and yeah, to protect heritage. And then obviously the work we're doing impacts people's lives in a different manner. So yeah, Professor, do you have any comments on that as well?
George, I mean, it relates very much to the GISTM guidelines, which are just for ICMM members. And of course, that's a wonderful step in the right direction. And I'm very close in finalizing a paper where we've compared, or we looked at the 6 largest mining members of the ICMM and how they've implemented, how they report on this following the GISTM. And of course, there are examples of being far more transparent. Every tailings facility now needs to have a GIS reference location. It needs to have a risk assessment done to it, and there's huge improvement on those things. I think the areas where the companies are still struggling, and I suspect this is also in South Africa, is to think more about tailing failures as potential disasters, which means if you think about a disaster, you need to think about the involvement of communities, and that gets done okay-ish, okay? But it's generally this is where it goes a little bit more, it becomes a bit more fluid, and companies don't always deal with this in much detail. One of the issues that I remember now, and I can't remember all the issues that from this other work, but the issues is the fact that if you've done a risk assessment, you can't assume that risk assessment would be like that for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. There might be issues of change that you need to think reassessing and getting the community to reassess the risk, getting to adjust. So it's not as if you've got this risk assessment done and the location of the dam done, that your job is done. It's a little bit more than that, and it requires long-term thinking and long-term adjustment. For one, just where people settle, they might not be there today, but in a year's time, they might settle people into the risk areas of facilities, which requires a rethinking of the whole system. And I think that sort of flexibility adjustment, that if you've got a regulation, people just go tick box and they tick it off. And there's still many other elements in that whole approach to thinking about disasters rather than failures that we need to get right, And there's progress. It's not as if the industry is not doing it. When I speak to people in the industry, they are complaining about the fact that they don't always get the buy-in from local government in this process. And they don't always get the buy-in from local communities in this process. Of course, part of the problem is, are you trying hard enough? But it's also not as if we can just tell them that they're not trying hard enough. I think it's a varied thing in the process. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you very much, Professor. And yeah, I just went back on our chat now, or the chat box here. So we do also have another question that is from Ms. Nancy Ellen Kluter, who's a colleague of ours. So Nancy's question is as such: Prof. Marais, Prof, based on your research, how have the affected communities been coping socially and economically since the disaster?
Yeah, I was hoping nobody was going to ask me that.
The difficult questions.
It's not that difficult. The answer to that is not very positive. Okay, so here's the type of dilemma. So we are working very hard to understand recovery, and there's some work going on to try and understand recovery as such. So, of course, the main thing about a good disaster management plan is that there's also a recovery plan in place. Okay, in this case, non-existent. All right, so let me start on the positive side. What seems to have been done fairly well. It was fairly easy to give people back their houses. Those that haven't gone to court, haven't gone to their own lawyers. If you've gone to your own lawyer, you will have to wait for a court case. Okay, but those who have not gone to lawyers got back their houses more or less the way it was. Okay. Now that was sort of an relatively easy process to do. Okay, what is more difficult, which seems to be very hard for the mining company to do, is to give people back their furniture. All right. So it depends on how hard you negotiate, how much you get. Okay. And of course, if you're in trouble, you sort of settle for the bare minimum in many cases. But there are examples of people getting 120,000 rand, and there are examples of people getting 20,000 rand. Okay. So that has been very difficult to do. The other thing that I've also already alluded to is that if you had an sort of economic activity that kept you alive, baking, welding, if you had a car that you used as a taxi to transport people, you lost the car, you didn't get back the car yet. Okay, and it seems like there's no chance you're going to get it back. And that is highly problematic in the process. I don't want to. My impression is that there are various irregularities in the recovery process, in the mines process. But I would try and stay out of the courts myself by not divulging it. So so recovery as such is a hell of a problem in my mind. Of course, recovery often depends on how people recover themselves, right? How they think about the future, and there are examples of people that actually manage fairly well under circumstances. But I think it's also the lack of an appropriate response in recovery, in my mind, is highly problematic, and as I've said, I think there's some irregularities that goes with it. I mean, the building works maybe mediocre is the way to explain it. The rebuilding of the houses, for example, many people got the same keys and locks for their front doors. What a horrible thing that my neighbor's got the same key for the front door. He or she can just open my front door. I mean, so yeah, there are serious problems in that process, and it's not what you would expect to do. It took them more than 2.5 years to recover their houses. for those that didn't go to the lawyers, and that in itself is a problem, because in any disaster recovery, you want to get people back to the home as quickly as possible. There were some regulatory issues and some conflict with the provincial government about it, which I still don't know what the truth is. But anyway, yeah, I'm rambling too much, but that's more or less the story.
Thank you so much, Professor Marais, for that wonderful presentation. Yeah, there was a lot to think about. And yes, you have made us rich, obviously, with knowledge now. So there is something to think about for everybody. And I would like us to perhaps to react and to just give Professor a round of applause. And if there's any other information or points that we need, then yeah, we can just, I suppose you're open to emails, obviously. I did see a hand. Was that, I'm not sure whose hand that was. Else, if, yeah, oh, okay, it was reacting. Yeah. So thank you very much, Professor. You are most welcome to stay on. Oh, Mr. Albertus, do you want to ask a question, or is this just the reacting? I think maybe, okay. I think people are maybe confusing the reacting and the hands up. So yeah, it's all hand claps to you.
They may be also close to 60 like me, you know, we don't always understand the systems.
Thank you very much, Professor. It is much appreciated.
Okay.
Okay. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. So right now we are going to go on to our next speaker and also our next topic. We are 3 minutes early, but let us just check in. And with Mr. Sabelo Madladla, are you there, sir? Can you hear me? Good morning. Welcome.
Loud and clear, Program Director. I can hear you.
Lovely, lovely. It is good to have you, and we also look forward to your presentation. So Mr. Madladla's presentation is going to be on emergency preparedness and response plans for museums and heritage sites. And the case study is, drumroll please, Robben Island, my island. No, I'm joking. I don't own the island. It is just, and it's also not named after me. My name is Robin, not Robben. So yes, I don't own the island, just for. So yes, Mr. Madladla is an environmental manager at Robben Island, and he'll be speaking on the said topic. So Mr. Madladla, if you could please grace us with your presentation, and because we are eagerly waiting for what you have to say and what you have to share with us. Thank you.
Let me make sure my face. Okay?
It's fine, sir. Okay, you can. We just see a black icon on your, yeah, we just see black screen. Maybe your camera is covered.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Yes, sir. We see you. Hi there, sir.
Okay. There we go.
We see you.
Yeah, Program Director, greetings, colleagues. Greetings. I work for Robben Museum. Amongst others, I'm responsible for biodiversity management, and I'll be taking you to the disaster risk issues for Robben Island, our integrated disaster risk management plan framework, and the steps we took to develop our ITRMP, and of course the current projects that we're busy with, on mitigations and disaster risk response. There we go. There we go. There we go. This is your island. Heritage site. and also a marine protected area, and a very important breeding area for various species of birds. And we are also a tourist destination, easily receiving 1,800 tourists per day. And we are governed by a broad legislative framework. And the size of the site is 618 hectares. And of course, it's a marine site. And we are easily 7 kilometers away from Blaubeck and 13 kilometers, 11 to 13 kilometers from the V&A waterfront. The site is a multi-layered historical landscape, and of course, 55% of it is wilderness, and of course, 40% is built. And there are various species of wildlife, as I've already mentioned, of which some of them are endangered. And the mode of transport to access the site, colleagues, are boats, and of course, we are also accessible with the small craft, like small aircraft. As I've already mentioned, the site in question is the Robben Island. As you already know, it's a well-rated site, and it's a main site, and of course there are other subsidiary sites like the Nelson Mandela Gateway, which is the gate to Robben Island, and we keep our collections at Maibui Archives at UWC, of course, situated on the mainland. And another 2 critical subsidiary sites, of course, are J21, which was the site where prisoners used to disembark from back in the days, and of course our receiving and dispatch point is Key 541, also along the shoreline here in Cape Town. This is your site, and you can actually see that the setup of it. Let me maybe say most of your build structures on the island, they owe their existence from the Second World War. The S3 itself was built during the Second World War, and most of your buildings in the entire village precinct, I want to say that, entire village precinct, which is situated in your southeast of the island, most of the buildings there owe their existence from the Second World War times. And this is basically our vision and mission, and we want to be an inspirational national and world heritage site that treasures symbolizing the triumph of human spirit over extreme adversity and injustice. And the mission, of course, we preserve and promote cultural and natural resources of the site, and then and of course our main focus as well is sustainable tourism, and then very critical to everything, colleagues, is to disseminate information, and yeah, that's basically the long and short of it. As I've already mentioned to you, the issues around the attributes of the site, here we have them. And then as of the site is, the buffer zone is a nautical mile from the high water mark, seawards. And the core, of course, is 618 hectares, and these are all the, distinct layers of history associated with the site. Okay, we are a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the inscription criteria, colleagues, that was used is 3 and 6. Maybe coming closer to the issues, let me just maybe open up Program Director with the definition of the disaster. It's a sudden, widespread, or localized calamitous event that seriously disrupts the functioning of a community or society and causes human death, injury, disease, as well as material loss. It has to be sudden, program director, and of course there will always be two elements: the likelihood and the severity. To say, what is likely to be the consequence if this event happens, and then in algebraic terms, program director, the risk will be likelihood times consequence, and the steps that we used to put together our integrated disaster risk management plan. Of course, we opened up with conceptualization phase, where we put together, ideas, and then there was an internal workshop cutting across from all different managers and some of the, strategic partners that are quite close to the institution, and of course, without assessment, you cannot plan. We had to go through desktop analysis and of course establish full stakeholder list, both internal and external, and then we immediately started engaging them, because you'll know, Chair, that the plan is a resource mobilization tool. Then you want to be as engaging as possible. Like the Robben Island plan must be able to speak to the city's plans, and the city's plan, of course, will speak to the provincial plans. Then, of course, we then conducted a risk assessment, of which bulk of it, was fieldwork, and then the draft was consolidated, and we then, took through all the interested and affected parties in the form of a workshop, and then the document was then, finalized, and then of course there was a training afterwards, and with reports as well disseminated to all the interested and affected parties. And of course, just on your right, program director, you can actually see that the disaster risk planning is basically an ongoing. It's kind of like a system, and it's ongoing. There'll always be preparedness, and you'll respond, and there's recovery, and you'll always be implementing mitigations. Okay, that's the basic one here. Just to give you a picture of our understanding here, program director, just to tell you that our understanding is that the integrated disaster risk must cover, the entire site, and including the subsidiary, sites, and it's a process that must be multi-stakeholder driven, given the fact that the plan is kind of like a mosaic, and it has to speak to other plans that exist in the country. And as already mentioned, it's a resource mobilization tool, and it should be continuous and systematic, and it must be measurable, and it has to be linked to other strategic documents of the plan. That's why here ours is linked to the annual performance plans, and then given the fact that we're a well-rated site and we have the integrated management plan, and it has to speak to it. And then, but very critical, program director, what I want to put across here is that, you want to put in your APP that, given this financial year, this this what we call or in the next financial year, you want to conduct so many drills, to make sure that your resources are well, vitalized and whatnot. That's a type of linkage I'm talking about. That's a type of performance, performance tool I'm talking about. And the plan itself has to be relevant to the scope. Meaning that's why it's critical that you go out and do field work, and then speak to all the relevant managers and the ground forces specialists and so forth, so that you produce a strategy, that is relevant and that is speaking to the entire scope of the site. And of course, very critical, program director, it has to be practical and implementable. On your left, is just to say to you that before the disaster, you will, of course, have to do the risk assessment. And then very critical, you must have mitigation, tools in place, because you want to prevent the disaster. It must not happen. And then, but that after mitigating and having done everything, the disaster might still decide not to respect you. It will still happen. And then that's why then you must then have in place, your response mechanism. And then, but during the disaster itself, that's when now you will, of course, dispatch your what you call your response procedures to ensure that you contain it as much as you can. And then after the disaster, there is noise coming through.
Can you switch off the mic, the volume?
After the disaster, there is, of course, damage assessment and other things that will be necessary, including rehabilitation. Okay, this is basically the basic framework, colleagues. During your risk assessment, of course, you cannot plan without a full assessment or without a survey. Then you must have a full understanding of your hazards and exposure, and the likelihood identification. And it often happens that, the likelihood, we have to speak to people that are on the ground. We have to consult, literature, and you have to speak to sector experts and so forth. And then, of course, C speaks to severity as well. And then D speaks to, because as I've already mentioned that, risk is just a question of likelihood by severity. And then you want to rank this risk, and then so that you have a full understanding of where to start. What is your risk number one? Where would you want to prioritize all your resources? But after having a full understanding of after having conducted your risk assessment, then you will then formulate a strategy. And then your strategy will, of course, have a mitigation plan to say, what are the preventative measures that you will have? If you are to talk about fire, what are the things that you must do to prevent fire from occurring? Like your fire breaks, like your reduction of fuel load. If you are to dealing with the alien invasive plants that prone your site to fire, then of course you want to remove them or do control bans and so forth. And of course, after critical to the strategy as well is your response plan. You must conduct those deals so that your teams are capable and proper in responding to any unfortunate event of a disaster. And you must have equipment in place and then resources as well, personnel, and also make sure that they are appropriately trained. But I want to say, Program Director, that this is obviously maybe the A and B are always, that's where you want to. They are very, very costly elements of the disaster risk, management. because you'll put a lot of money in, let's say maybe for to our site, and it's fully covered by alien invasive plants, and the access is very restricted. And I mean, the climate change is a reality, and we are seeing extreme winds, and that can easily reach 120 kilometers per hour. And then in case of a disaster, and chances are the island won't be accessible, and it will take the city of Cape Town easily 4 hours for them to respond to the city, because of course the swells will also be extreme. And then you want a team, you must have a team on site, that is able to easily respond to such disasters. But very critical is obviously mitigations, to say that how do you remove vegetation and replace it with the like, and and also have appropriate equipment like your fire trucks and so forth, to ensure that while you're waiting for help from the mainland, you are able to assist yourself. But sea speaks to recovery, and which is also critical, to say, you have strategic partners on the mainland where you can, while going through, when you part of your response, where you can salvage whatever is salvageable to and take it to a certain space on the mainland. And this might be a biodiversity asset. Just get to think of penguins. In case of penguins are flightless, and chances are, in case of fire, they will probably walk into fire. And as we speak, they are critically endangered. And the numbers are sitting at easily 600 breeding pairs. And then any incident will obviously wipe the population away. Then it's critical that Robben Island, as strategic partners on the mainland, that will be able to receive penguins in case of, maybe think of oil pollution and so forth. And as I've already mentioned, colleagues, that the plan has to be linked, has to be measured. The performance of it has to be measured, and then part of the plan is must include monitoring and evaluation. And again, these are just definitions, colleagues. This is from literature. Frequency, we say something is rare. And let me maybe start from number 5. Number 5 here at the bottom. It's frequent if it happens 1 or more times a year. And remember, we said risk is a question of likelihood and severity. And then saying here, it's frequent. It's something is frequent if it happens 1 or more times a year, and meaning it's very likely, and it will occur in most circumstances. And it's rare if event happens less than 1,000 years, and meaning it's very unlikely that it will happen. It will happen. And when it comes to severity, program director, and of course the numbers that are allocated is 1 to 5, and ranging from insignificant to catastrophic. And it's catastrophic. It's catastrophic if it results in several, too many deaths, or numerous, or the outcome is basically quite severe as far as the people are concerned. But on the social aspect, is basically, of course, the catastrophic loss of it's basically it's characterized by a catastrophic loss of economic and social assets, and then to the environment, of course, it's catastrophic environmental destruction. And if I could go through to one, the description will be, as far as people are concerned, it can actually be regarded as insignificant if you're talking about one injury. And as far as social is concerned, small loss of property, and of course, as far as the environment is concerned, it's insignificant if you're talking about a few entities, damaged. But of course, we have insignificant, you have minor, and you have moderate, and major, and catastrophic. And I think it's critical to have a full understanding of these things, because then it, both the likelihood and severity in determining your risk register, and to inform you where to prioritize your resources. Just again here, if you were to allocate numbers again here in determining your risk, your risk register for your site, likelihood from the table that I've just taken you through, from 1 to 5, and then of course allocating numbers on severity as well, from 1 to 5. Let's just get to think of it. Let's just say, the fire on the island, Robben Island, is very likely to happen, and then the what you call it, the consequence of it will be catastrophic, meaning you will then, the risk rating of fire on the island will then of course be 25. But if you then, fire is very likely to happen on the island, but the consequence is insignificant, then of course you will then allocate 1. It's as simple as that, colleagues. And then again, this is just the risk rankings of our site, and the site is a marine site, and unfortunately, pollution is sitting high on our rankings, because we are within the port of Cape Town, and if you go through literature, you will know that boats are always likely to capsize as they leave Cape Town, or as they're approaching Cape Town, and again, it often happen, on the northwest of Robben Island. And when a boat capsizes, just get to think of it carrying 100,000 tons of crude oil, and there are penguins that are foraging in those areas, and then it's a given that they will get contaminated, and oil will also drift to Robben Island, and Robben Island will obviously likely to close shop, and then that's why the likelihood is quite high, and the severity as well is quite high. And then accident at sea here, our mode of transport, our main what you call mode of transport, of course, is the boats, and then the likelihood is less, relatively less, but of course severity is basically high, and fire, again, because given the fact that there are so many mitigations that we have in place, and then we have reduced our exposure, but we of course know that both our biodiversity and heritage assets will be terribly impacted in the case of fire. Just to take you through, colleagues, to some of the mitigations and preparedness activities that we do. On your far right, you can see that there's a whole lot of clearing that we get to do on the island, because I've already mentioned that Most of our vegetation is island invasive plants, mainly rooikrans and highly combustible. And it's critical that it's thinned, especially around buildings. It's thinned and you know, where possible, you know, take it out completely, and of course, you obviously want to then to do control bands. And as I already mentioned, and we need to make sure that your team is capable, to respond in case of a disaster. In a nutshell, it's a removal of a hazard, and then fuel load reduction, which is critical, and then training that has to be ongoing as well. Currently, as I'm speaking to you, we are going through a high pathogenic avian influenza, and unfortunately, Robben Island is the epicenter of this avian flu. To date, we have lost hadlap gulls. 541 hadlap gulls have died, and as you can see, other species also have also been affected. And as you can see, the spread of the disease here on the island, and look, it's of course affecting our wildlife, and it has a potential of also affecting our tourism. Part of responding to it, Program Director, is to make sure that our team on the ground is revitalized, and on how to collect carcasses. Because let me just maybe contextualize. We have easily 5,000 breeding pairs of hadlap gulls, and oyster catchers are currently breeding as I speak to you as well. And other species with penguins and so forth. But this particular avian flu is unfortunately affecting hadlap gulls. And then we have in place our partners on board, the specific Suncorp. We are working with Suncorp, to assist us in responding to this disaster. And then critical to these colleagues is to revitalize your team on the ground, ensure that you have equipment. You give a training to them to revitalize them, and basic things like you obviously want to stop the spread of the disease, and daily activities will be to be able to identify symptomatic birds, and unfortunately euthanize them, and then collect as well carcasses of dead birds from the breeding colonies, and of course unfortunately we have to bury them as well, and to make sure that we stop the flu from spreading to other species on the island. And just maybe to speak about other mitigation activities, Chen, with regards to the ferry operations. It's critical that you have partnerships in place with the likes of the NSRI, because this basically means that you have tourists on the boat, and the boat is on transit to Robben Island, and the weather suddenly changes, and the boat capsizes. What can you do? And then some of those things are things that you cannot stop, but you must have operations in place. And then it's the responsibility of the relevant manager or respective manager to ensure that collaborations are in place and functioning. The figure at the bottom here is basically indicating. And then yeah, that's basically the long and short of it, to say you must have mitigations in place, and in the form of either in the form of activities that you're doing out there or in the form of partnerships. Since my archives colleagues will remember that I mentioned earlier on that my archives is situated at UWC, and it houses a lot of collections that belong to Robben Island. And it's situated within the university precinct, and it's basically vulnerable to various disaster risk. And drills are quite critical. Staff that are responsible for the management of collections, they must be, familiar with the disaster response, activities. Because, I mean, you can easily talk about, fire can easily wipe away your collections. And of course, we know that water can damage your collections. Then you want to make sure that there is also a plan in place, to equip your staff to respond better to such disaster situation. And of course, the manager of the center will of course take responsibility for that. And as you can see under 4, there is a fire protection system in place to ensure that in case of a disaster, we are able to activate it and stop and be able to contain fire. And again, I mean, the professor said it earlier on, to say that there must be a validity period linked to your plan, and after it has to be reviewed, the validity period, and then you of course you want to review it to assess the risk and come up with new ideas. Just to conclude, Program Director, these are basically some of the activities that we are busy with, or that we are planning to implement in the near future. The aim is to accelerate maintenance of the built environment on the island. These are buildings, and most of them are quite old, dating back during the Second World War, and even maybe before, during the leper times. And they're quite vulnerable to disaster situations. Then they need a lot of love and care for them to be able to withstand extreme weather situations. And another critical thing that we want to have is a contingency fund, because now we know that oil pollution and wildfires, both of these threats top our risk register. You want to have a ring-fenced, fund that can assist you in case of what you call of a disaster. Because I mean to say, just get to think of your SCM processes. The island is on fire or fully contaminated by will you then write submissions and requests for funds? You want a fund that is readily available, where you can then start activating it. We also want to have a satellite hospital for seabeds, because dating back as 1930, before that. There's clear indication that boats are capsizing offshore Robben Island. That's why there are so many shipwrecks on Robben Island. And with the climate change as a reality now, we are likely to see more of this happening. And then, with the oil pollution, there is no mitigation that you can have for it, because I mean, you cannot tell the boats not to capsize, and they are out there. You don't have control over them, and we are just a management authority responsible for Robben Island. The only thing that way you can up your game is your response capability. And unfortunately, this element that is always likely to get badly affected is your power diversity. And given the experience that we have had on the oil pollution incident, is that, seabeds get badly impacted. And then we do not want to rely on Suncorp to say that whatever bed that we capture on the island, of course, we'll activate volunteers to respond. And then you do not want to take beds directly to Suncorp. You want a kind of like a stabilization facility on the island, that where you can, handle beds, decontaminate them, and then take them to the mainland as a, for full recovery. And as I've already mentioned, okay, then of course this satellite hospital will of course cost money. We are busy mobilizing funds, and it will just be a question of using one of the buildings that is currently unutilized. Make sure that there's warm water and whatnot, and other basic features for this need. And then it's very easy to put these plans together, program director, the integrated disaster risk management plan. But to resource it is of course the most difficult thing to do. Fire truck alone cost about easily 6 million rand. And to have, personnel and to have implement ongoing mitigations, it costs money. And we are busy mobilizing funds to ensure that there's a proper fire truck on the ground, and of course to accelerate our mitigations activities. And again, another difficult activity to do is the total removal of alien plants on the island. And of course, because when you remove these plants, you must be able to replace them with something similar, because you wouldn't want to erode history. And then again, the site is a breeding habitat for various species of seabirds, and then critical to these are penguins that are breeding understory with this vegetation, and it's probably one of those most difficult activity to do, because that this island vegetation is quite highly combustible, and climate change is here to stay, and it's a matter of the mass that we adapt, and then and then this vegetation is part of the heritage landscape, and you have to, whatever tree that you remove, you must replace it, and one, so that you do not erode history. Number two, so that you speak to the breeding requirements of birds and so forth. It's a very expensive exercise, and but it has to happen. But the approach we are currently using, program director, is to be as systematic as possible. and to prioritize certain areas and focus on spaces that are in close proximity to to building, and yeah, you of course need a dedicated team to implement the plan. It's already mentioned earlier on, program director, that the plan, the development and the implementation of a plan of disaster risk plan is multi-stakeholder driven activity. You need to identify all your role players, and you need to ensure that collaborations are there and functioning. Given the context of our site, and SAMSA, NSRI, SANCOP, SANPACS, the DFFE, and of course the competent authority, SARA, it's critical that we keep them close to to us. But again, in terms of because we know that these disasters are always, you will do everything, program director, and these disasters will still happen. It's critical that you accelerate your efforts in conservation. Document your site, and where possible, digitize your collections. That's why RIM, is currently busy digitizing the Maibuye, collections. And thank you, Chair. I'll stop here and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabelo, for that insightful presentation. Yeah, Robben Island is a very big site, and I mean, we can see it on the screen there. So it does take a lot, obviously, to manage the site. It's not just a small portion. So it's the entire island. I mean, there's multiple heritage resources. Actually, the entire island with a 1 radius nautical mile is a heritage resource, but on it you have even more. So I suppose the complexities just builds up how you manage everything there. So with that being said, I'm going to open for questions. I see at the moment there's none from our chat box. Oh, okay. Mr. Madida, yes, I spoke a second too early. Mr. Madida, you are recognized. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to I think is it Sabelo for the presentation on Robben Island. I think I would like to know, particularly, maybe I might ask with a specific site. I know that his presentation is much broader, but with specific reference to risk mitigation in as far as the sites that are on the coastline. I think it's to the west of the island, the Bluestone Quarry walls and the Bluestone Quarry itself. Given the rising sea levels and given also the and increasing ferociousness of the wind and therefore the waves, I think that site was really on the edge of the sea, as it were. And I mean, it was quite as sort of 2003, 2004, it was really being battered by the sea. Then, I mean, it's almost 20 years later, or just a little over 20 years or so later. One wonders whether what the impact on that particular heritage has been, and if there are any other, if there's been sort of some mitigation that is really focused at perhaps conserving that particular site, given that it is the closest to the sea compared to other sites that are located on Robben Island. And that's perhaps my first question. And then the other one is concerning the sort of, if we're looking at climate change, and particularly the risks that arise from this, the fabric that is on historic building would be impacted by either the increase in the in the conditions around the island, and what measures have been put in place to mitigate that sort of long term going forward. Because I think this is about also thinking about policy planning in line with the changes in the in the climate that affect particularly heritage sources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Madida. Sabella, is there anything that maybe you want to respond or want to say to that?
Thank you, Program Director. Look, let me start with the Bluestone Quarry. Mr. Madida is right. The Bluestone Quarry is quite exposed to disaster risk situations, and especially in winter. It's right on the rocky shores, and it's a very historically significant site, and it's on the side of the island, northwest of the island. That's where you get swells at times reaching 12 meters, and the wind can easily reach 120 kilometers per hour. And there have been conversations dating back as 2004, if I'm not mistaken, on how to better protect the quarry. And there were different, views. And I remember, environmentalists went on to say, leave it as is, and say, look, leave it as is, and let it continue to be a breeding site for Hadlap gulls, but of course we went on to secure an approval for its rehabilitation, and then as I speak to you, the wall has been rehabilitated, and then the talks are currently underway to build a solid wall at the back of the facade, in the form of dollars, or in the form of strong structure to protect the quarry wall, because you get a quarry and you get a wall, and what Mr. Madida is referring to is basically the wall that is quite exposed to disaster situations. And then we are trying to secure a permit now to build a solid wall at the back of the facade, because there are issues of authenticity, and you would want to keep your wall as authentic as possible. And then, because the wall is dry, it's a dry wall and quite exposed to what to call to swells, and that's one. And then, yeah, in nutshell, we are currently building a wall at the back of the facade, and the vulnerable fabric of the built environment, and yes, you're correct, our buildings are old and they quite vulnerable to disaster situations, and then what is critical to this is your day-to-day maintenance and your reactive maintenance, and we fortunately we have maintenance implementing agent that's currently on site and responsible for your day-to-day maintenance, and of course it's a function of public works, and it's quite critical that we maintain our good relationship with public works, and to ensure that your day-to-day maintenance and reactive maintenance are implemented. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Thank you very much. Yes. So we do have, I've just watched the chat box now. And yes, we do have a question from here at the castle where I'm seated. And that is from Ms. Lauren Buchanan. She would like to ask some questions, please. Yeah, to Sabelo. So Ms. Lauren Buchanan is seated beside me, and she is the manager of the built environment, which is the unit that I work in.
Thanks, Program Director. It's quite cool to sit next to your officer and he's now leading. So I do appreciate that. Thank you so much, Sabelo, for your presentation. Colleagues online and colleagues in the room, I think we would be hard-pressed to find an individual that is more knowledgeable and more enthusiastic about what I would very boldly but confidently state to be South Africa's most visited National Heritage Site and World Heritage Site. Honestly, Robben Island, Robin's already spoken about it. It's a large site physically. It's complex. It's it's got cultural aspects. It's got natural aspects. And even within the culture, the heritage, there are various aspects. We can see when we go to site, we don't just, for example, look at the buildings, we look at structures. There are also graves, burial grounds, archaeological resources too. But what is really incredible about this presentation is, as a World Heritage Site, and this is going to be implemented by one of the other departments, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, is that disaster risk management plans, or in this case for Robben Island, it's an integrated disaster risk management plan. It's a requirement to ensure the safeguarding of our heritage. And I think this also links back to the previous presenter, Prof. Marais, where, sometimes disaster can be a slow onset and it is preventable, and also to engage with communities. So that's quite a mouthful, but I've got two questions for you, Sabelo, and no pressure. So we've spoken about, I want to say about the theory. So you gave us definitions. We even got some equations today. But especially in the built environment, we look to more, or I like to highlight the practical application. How do we go about this? So my first question, and this you have touched on it, so I'm very pleased, but I would like you really to elaborate here. We speak of Robben Island as an island, but we also now understand that Robben Island also has various satellite, I don't want to say offices, but spaces, and the Mayabuya Archives being one of them at the University of the Western Cape. Now, I'm very curious to know how you coordinate, because remember, University of the Western Cape is its own organization, its own entity. So how do you organize or coordinate your disaster risk management plan with another institution when you are based in their facility? And then the second question, and this is definitely more from an operational standpoint, I like to see that, and I can also vouch for this, Sarah has commented on the latest version of this disaster risk management plan. How are you as an individual, an employee of RIM, how are you empowered, and how are you, do you do, I don't want to say, do you go to like an hour training a week, or how is this implemented from an operational standpoint? So I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Buchanan. Now we will go back to Mr. Matladla. If you can respond with your thoughts. Thank you.
Get hot here. It's getting tough. Look, Lauren, you're correct. Maibuya it's a critical feature of Robben Island, and it carries very important collections. And it's always going to be difficult to have, your responsibility, something that you're responsible for being housed, somewhere else. But it is what it is, and the issues of fees must fall as we speak, and then students can do whatever they want to do. We've seen it in many universities where the riots and you know, that can easily affect our collection. But I mean, there have been talks of relocating the Maibu here to closer to town, where it will be much more accessible, you know, to the public. And again, where it is currently is right under, you know, it's basically in the basement and quite exposed to, you know, to floods and so forth. And it's, yeah, it's quite exposed. And I mean to say, and unfortunately, you have to rely on the processes of the tools of the university to take care of the facility. And unfortunately, it becomes the function of the collections manager, you know, to ensure that the systems are there and tools are in place, you know, to protect the collections. And we are not happy. I'm personally not happy. You know, as I've already mentioned, it's very central to what Robben Island is all about, and yet it's physically situated in a precinct that is managed by another institution, and it's a very you know, scary thing. But maybe SARA, as a competent authority, might have to rule in this in the future, because I'm sure there is this everywhere, you know, in South Africa. And where, because I mean to say, Robben Island must be accountable, you know, but in the makeup, other colleagues will, you know, colleague told me that, look, the Maibu archives predates the formation of Robben Island Museum. It basically informed, you know, the formation of Robben Island Museum, and the people donated their collections to the university, and it's a very difficult one, you know, to what to call to rule on, and but I mean to say, it's just a question of ensuring that tools are in place, collaborations are in place, and yeah, but whatever infrastructure that we can fit within the building, you know, like the fire suppression system and whatnot, you know, must be there, and you still have employees that are within your employ, and it's critically important that, you know, you train them and ensure that they are capable to deal with basic things, because, you know, basic thing can be basically, you know, for flooding, you know, fire coming, so I'm talking water coming through the main door. You know, your staff must have basic tools to what to call to respond. And then on the training, and when I've been with Robben Island for 15 years, and it's like a mini South Africa, and it's a residential area and a tourist destination and so forth. And you must be able to be self-sustainable. And of course, you know, my daily activities involve mitigations, and then my daily activities involve mobilizing resources and speaking to you, speaking to the city of Cape Town, speaking to different colleagues, you know, in securing resources. I'm not close in getting it right, and that's why now I'm saying I'm basically pushing for the fire truck, and I'm pushing for the Department of Sports Arts and Culture to assist me in what to call. And from time to time, I get to speak to the city of Cape Town, you know, to assist me in deploying or dispatching, you know, a bunch of colleagues to come over, and I keep them for 3 days or 4 days. You know, city will give me about easily 30, 40 warm bodies, and they'll come over with a fire truck and so forth. And then they assist me in implementing the, you know, the mitigations in the form of control bands. You know, because a fuel reduction is quite critical. Yeah, no, that's basically I don't know whether to call it training, but that's what we do on day-to-day basis. And then, but we are still at the building stage. And then, yeah, that's the long and short of it, Lauren. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I see there's a comment also from the chat box. It's again from Mr. Albertus, Martin Albertus. I'll just read it out, and it's just for noting. Perhaps the aspect of coordinating various heritage resources locations raises the issue regarding the efficiency and effectiveness of resource mobilization, which in itself reviews institutional mandates, co-financing, technical support, etc. Hopefully the resource mobilization strategy addresses gaps and opportunities. Thank you very much, Mr. Albertus. It is appreciated. And then there's another that has come through from Nancy Ellen Kluter, our colleague. Thank you, Sabelo Matladla, for the informative presentation. In your opinion, do you believe that the growing numbers of visitors or tourists to the island, and that is now speaking to human traffic, vehicles, and general access to sensitive zones, has contributed to the disruption of nesting, adding to stress of the wildlife? There are worries that the infrastructure and management management planning, I beg your pardon, have not kept pace with visitor growth. Do you believe this too? Thank you. If maybe you can just respond to that, Mr. Matlala, and then, yeah. And then also, just before you go, there's another comment from Mr. Albertus with regard to training. We note, of course, the role of World Heritage Leadership Program and associated advisory bodies, that is IUCN, ICROM, ICOMOS, with regard to capacity building. So thank you. That's also noted, sir. So to answer Nancy's question or with the wildlife, Mr. Matadla, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Program director, you are bribing me.
It's not me, it's from the chat, sir.
Okay, thank you for the comments. Look, the increasing number of tourists, we want to see more tourists coming over. And it's, of course, a question of diversification of your tourism offerings, controlling traffic, and then ensuring that there is a harmony between the receiving environment and tourism activities. We need money because money doesn't fall from the sky for conservation. Conservation is quite costly. To maintain your building on the mainland, you'll probably do it once in 10 years. But for a building on the island that is exposed to salinity and extreme weather conditions, you have to do it once in 2 years, because the salinity eats on the what you call it will eat your fabric, whether steel or paint or whatever. Then it has to be continuous, and it's quite costly. Then you need money. You need your tourism activities to be up to speed so that you can generate money for your maintenance. But then we need tourists, and I'm employed to ensure that there is less impact as much as possible. Nature or the receiving environment is protected. Carrying capacity has to be conducted. In terms of the number of people that can be at one space at a time, it has to be known, has to be established. You do not want to overexpose, your assets. That's why the gospel we are preaching now is that we would want to expose the entire island to tourists as much as possible, because by so doing, you will be able to, manage your traffic better, generate more money, and you do not want, because currently you have 1,800 tourists that are going to the prison. They want to see the Mandela cell. but easily 30% of those tourists are of course interested to ecotours. It's critical that we have that as a product so that then we alleviate pressure from what you call. Then it's just a question of I'm here, I'm employed by the museum, I've got colleagues that I'm working with, and then that must always be in place to ensure that the impacts the colleague is talking about are managed, are spoken about, impacts are mitigated and whatnot. And in fact, your Protected Areas Act talks about this, about commercialization of these spaces, but critical to this, you must have tools, impact assessment tools in place. There will be insignificant activities. Well, maybe like you get a tourist, or I'm now not talking about the tourists that get routed to the island and then they get passed around and whatnot. I'm now talking about the outdoor activities. Maybe you want to come and have a certain outdoor activity on the island. We have a system in place on the island whereby the marketing will apply to us as a internal compliance department to say that, look, there is this request, and then we'll ask difficult questions to say, what is your waste management plan, and what activities will be conducted, and so forth. I'm talking about now the internal or minor or insignificant activities that do not necessarily need to go to competent authorities like SARA, your City of Cape Town, or your DFFE. It's a matter of the mass that, we have systems in place, you establish these systems and you implement them as you move forward. Then, yeah, that's how I will answer that one. And I think the other ones are basically comments. Martin was talking about the leadership program and so forth. And yeah, thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matlala. And with that, we're going to conclude, and we say thank you very much to you for availing yourself and to sharing this information regarding the disaster risk plan with us. It is appreciated. We do encourage everyone to obviously visit the different, not just Robben Island, but our various heritage sites. I mean, it is not SARA's heritage site or mine or yours. It is everybody's heritage site. So let's go out and enjoy these, and then also so that we can learn and be cognizant of our histories. With that being said, the next, we are just slightly with the timing, but it's not an issue. The next speaker is also Sabelo, but this Sabelo is Sabelo Kumalo, and she's a heritage officer, a senior heritage officer, I beg your pardon, within the development applications unit that is with us as SARA. So she's a colleague of ours. And her presentation will be on oil spill model and heritage sites, planning for future potential disasters and anticipating impacts to heritage resources and proposed mitigations. Sabelo Kumalo, are you there? Good afternoon now. It's afternoon. Can you hear me? Are you visible? You can go ahead. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm visible, I think. Let's see.
You can share screen and then we can proceed. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. Let me just share my screen. Is it visible on my screen?
Yes, clearly visible, and we can hear you perfectly fine, so you can proceed. Thanks.
All right, okay, thank you. Let's just do a slideshow more quickly. So today I'll be presenting on a workshop that I attended that mainly spoke about the oil spill model, and then how it made me think about future planning and possible mitigation measures for any disaster-related events that happen within South Africa's territorial waters, and also thinking about the wider disaster management planning across South Africa for heritage management. So just this presentation will be very brief. I'll be discussing just managing potential risks to heritage sites within South Africa due to man-made disasters. Also looking at the current risk management of heritage resources, mainly on land, and then also just briefly proposing future mitigation measures and considerations for the wider heritage industry. So I work within the development applications unit, and we mainly deal with heritage management and in the form of receiving development applications and providing comments and decisions on the conservation of long-term heritage within the development sphere. And we do work closely with our fellow units, especially the National Inventory Unit, particularly because they help manage SARIS, which is the platform we mainly work off of. And with SARIS, we are able to document heritage resources within the country and then also manage the identification process and also development application processes. And we are heavily reliant on the heritage inventory within SARIS to actually make future high-level planning and management decisions, and also to provide all of our data within SARIS to other departments like DEFE, who are also in the processes of developing long-term planning and management processes like the screening tool, and also another a database system that's being developed by DEFE for the ocean, which is OSIMS. So as a heritage officer in the DAU, I have been attending various planning meetings with DFFE, because we are invited into these planning meetings to give input for heritage management once they start doing large-scale spatial frameworks and development frameworks for the country. And this, by involving us, it means that they are trying to involve heritage and heritage conservations within the earliest phases of national development plans. And such examples is the strategic environmental assessments that happen across the country, especially for the large power line developments, as well as the planned gas network pipelines, and also to open up South Africa's territorial waters for the ocean economy that was presented by the president around about 2020. And then in turn, by us being involved in these planning meetings, it has helped us to realize that maybe SARA needs to start fully developing any risk management and conservation management procedures for the national estate that we currently manage. And I'm just basing it off of the paper that was written by Clinton Jackson and Leomile and in 2018, which looked at the risk-based approaches for heritage management as the starting point we have to conservation of heritage management in the National Inventory Unit. So within their paper, they had presented the current themes that are being used by departments that actually map out disaster management risks. And those maps were looking at thematic risks like fault fires, seismic activities, as well as uncontrolled development, and how that is a risk that needs to be planned for by the government. And from there, I think what better theme work for SARA, and more specifically for the DAU, is looking at such instances like uncontrolled development that poses a huge risk for heritage management. And as a state body, SARA as a state body, we should really be developing and fleshing out our disaster management framework for heritage, as is required in terms of Section 25 of the Disaster Management Act of 2002. And currently, because much of our database, heritage database, is very much on heritage sites on our land, on the land, is that we could preemptively use our current database of heritage for mapping out such risks as potential uncontrolled development, and for instances where we can actually send our heritage database to other government departments who are also doing pre-feasibility studies and pre-mapping and planning for heritage sensitivities, like DEFI is currently doing for many of the environmental sensitivity work that they're actually looking towards planning and developing. But in this instance, there's very much little information on how we can do look at disaster management for the maritime space. And I think this is another portion that needs to be looked at in greater detail, so that we can have better coverage once we start developing a risk management system within SARA for heritage management. Currently, still working off of land-based heritage data, is that we do know the types of developments that happen to have a likely higher risk to impact heritage sites. So major developments within the mining sector would have a greater impact on heritage, because such development tends to happen within rural areas in South Africa, and they tend to have large infrastructure that might collapse, or that might affect greater portions of land, that might then increase the potential of impacting heritage, potentially heritage that we also do not know about, or that was probably identified through the heritage impact assessment processes. And such infrastructure would be like long conveyor belts for the mining industry, coal mining, and most mining has pollution control dams that might potentially collapse. And we know this has happened, and this is a huge risk because of sites that like Jagersfontein, that also we recently had to experience what might happen with a collapse of a pollution control dam. And also we know of sites within close to Mapungubwe that have been affected by the collapse of waste rock dams. This is particularly affected a spring site that was used and is also considered an archaeological site. And this site was also majorly impacted by the collapse of a waste rock dump. And such infrastructure, we know, actually pose a significant risk. But this is what we currently know, which is also very limited. And this type of information needs to be expanded and included in a form of a risk database for heritage management, and to see and map out the potential risks, because we do know where our mines are located and what types of infrastructure that they build, and how it will affect heritage sites. And therefore we could actually start looking to develop a risk map to see also the expansion of such developments might cause certain risks in certain areas, and risk to what types of sites that we manage as our. And then, but currently, the mitigation measures that are in place for preventing such disasters to happen on land-based sites is that when we're looking at development applications, we look also at the blasting and vibration assessments. We look at the impacts of dust on some of our heritage sites that are particularly significant to the impacts of dust like rock art, and also to assess the change in our cultural landscape within a development application, which we would ask for such assessments to actually look for heritage impact assessments to actually look at the results of these studies to determine if this will affect any heritage sites. And from there, we then propose some monitoring measures and mitigation measures, like ensuring that underground mines look for and monitor any potential subsidence that might affect surface heritage sites. We propose larger buffer zones around high-risk infrastructure like pollution control dams because of these known risks that we have. But like I said, we don't have a written document that would have a protocol or guideline document to show to the public and internally on the things that we have gained through experience working within the unit. And what we currently lacking is in ways in which we can enforce the use of our legislation so that there's better management of our heritage and the better management of certain risks that we foresee when we receive different applications that might affect the wider landscape or wider cultural landscape. So from learning on our land-based experience, and because the DAU has now taken consolidated and taken over looking at development applications within the maritime environment, we are now starting to realize the shortcomings that we have worked on, looking at applications at a piecemeal basis, that we really need to formalize a certain process to look at risk management, to look at potential impacts within just on the land and within our maritime space for long-term conservation of our heritage resources. And this realization is coming about by us attending such workshops like the workshop we attended earlier in the year on oil spill modeling for our coastal waters, and to attend DEFI's, the Department of Fishery, Forestry and the Environment's working group meetings, where they propose and start doing any planning processes for like the maritime spatial planning workshops that we are now attending as the DAU. And from these workshops, we are tasked at the earliest phase not only to map out or provide a map or a heritage sensitivity map for our maritime heritage, and also to develop a sector plan so that at the earliest phase of development, since government is intending to open up the ocean economy, is that already developers can start targeting and doing feasibility studies by including heritage at the earliest phase, so that they know and select for areas that have lower sensitivities to heritage. And what we're finding is that within the maritime sector is that there's a greater focus on Indigenous knowledge systems and local community consultations, as well as the greater levels of community involvement in expressing how they feel about development within this zone of heritage management. And from there, we're looking at opportunities to develop risk management for the maritime heritage by using all of the information that has been developed by Wild Trust in developing a South Africa-specific oil spill model. I think it will help us to guide in developing a specific risk management for maritime heritage, and understanding that heritage sites within our maritime space and our coastal areas might be greatly affected by potential oil spills, as we are observing that we're receiving more and more exploration and drilling cases within our territorial waters. And from their research, they found that by developing a South African specific oil spill model, they've noted that there might be greater influence on our coastal sites. There might be greater impacts to our beaches, and also that the oil just doesn't disappear. It either some of it evaporates, some of it sinks into the ocean, and if we as government don't have mitigation measures for how do we clean up oil spills, we will never know exactly the potential impacts when we look at development applications. And this needs to be thought about at the earliest phases or when we receive and read any of development applications. And so from there, I spoke to the people who were representing Wild Trust and who actually presented the research for them to provide us with their information. And they provided us with the geotiffs of their models. And from there, we took those geotiffs, and I asked the National Inventory to actually provide a map of this oil spill model and how it would affect our maritime resources. And from here, you can see that originally the models would indicate that oil wouldn't really affect the coast of South Africa, but a South African specific model indicates that an oil spill will greatly affect the coastline. Providing this map just details just a surface threshold of the density of oil. If it reaches 100 grams of oil, if it reaches our coast, it will affect how it will affect our coastline. And also, if there's an oil spill off of the coast of Durban, how it will greatly affect the whole entire coastline of South Africa. And these are the types of models that we could use to start developing risk mitigation measures for our maritime environment. And to think that just south of an oil spill from Durban will start affecting within one day heritage sites within the South Coast, like the Hole in the Wall, the Splash Rock, Uvongo Falls, and the Mzamba fossils and petrified forest woods on the coast itself, as well as shipwrecks within our deeper waters, will be greatly affected within one day of such an event happening. And we need to start thinking and actually participating in other government departments, disaster management planning frameworks and implementations for managing oil spills, because they currently do have such planning meetings themselves. And so just briefly, I just want to present some proposed mitigation measures that as a heritage authority, we can just use this model to develop concrete maritime heritage mitigation measures, so that our specialists within the field can also start using these models and developing and refining any potential recommendations that could be presented in a heritage impact assessment report, so that even if I were to leave or be moved into another section, this model and this information that has been presented to us can then be an industry standard. But also further work needs to be done in terms of preparedness, because within attending these planning meetings, I then was informed that the front runner or the department that is actually identified to coordinate a body for oil spill cleanups is Department of Transport, but they themselves don't have a method or way to actually intervene for heritage sites and to actually present ways and measures to actually mitigate or prevent such oil spills from affecting our heritage sites. And this information needs to be developed by not just SARA, but as a an integrated approach by SARA and maritime specialists to develop measures in which we can have mitigation measures that are included into a heritage-specific disaster management plan that could be presented to the coordinating body to assist us, because they're the ones who would be the first ones informed of an oil spill much faster than us. And if from this model, it's indicated that we actually have 1 day to react to an oil spill that happens in South Africa, then fast action is needed to prevent any further damage or impact to heritage sites. And this is the type of information that should start coming through within our heritage impact assessments, also within our decision-making processes, and whatever decisions that we issue should now start considering such impacts, including potential risks, not just to heritage sites, but also to the way and how it will affect the ways and the way people live and access the heritage sites and the coast itself. And I think that I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nkukanya. Sabelo, sorry. Yeah, Sabelo Nokukanya. I always call you either by the one or the other name. Yeah, you're getting a lot of applause there. It looks like you've made an impact. So thank you very much. With that being said, I'm going to open the floor as an opportunity for questions and engagement. Is there anyone that would like to say something? I've also seen from our senior manager, Mr. Ben Mosinga, is also commended you, Nokukanya, on your presentation. Well done. Since there's no one yet, I do have something, Sabelo. And my question, it's just a simple one, and it's pertaining to best practice models or successes. Do you perhaps know of any, because you have referred a lot to the South African context? So perhaps, is there something that you've read, you've seen that's happening globally that we can obviously as South Africa apply here that could help us with all the things that you've just mentioned? Just maybe 1 or 2 examples. Thanks.
I currently don't know of any best practices for how to deal with oil spills or any significant disaster that happens, especially man-made disasters that happen and affect heritage sites. Currently, looking at the disasters that have happened inland, literally there has been, it's either the whole entire site is written off as destroyed, and the last record of such a site occurring would have been the Heritage Impact Assessment report itself. But also long-term monitoring of sites. I'm thinking of a mine in close to Mapungubwe, Vele Colliery, was that a site that was affected by a collapse of a waste rock dump, is that they tried rehabilitating the spring site by clearing away the excess soil that had fallen onto the site, and then also building and constructing a small drainage dam, also just slightly south of the site. And this work was done around about 2018-19, but to date, the spring site has not recovered. So the spring itself has not actually managed to be revived. So the impacts are permanent. And the current mitigation from just that one example from a man-made disaster has not yielded great results. And in fact, because there's the environment has changed, the spring has changed itself, and there's less vegetation in the area because there's less surface water. The midden that was also part and considered part of the site is slowly eroding away. when rains come about every year. So there's no great example we currently have within South Africa on managing or mitigating heritage sites that are affected by man-made disasters.
Thank you so much, Sabella. Mr. Albertus, I feel like I've been almost like your spokesperson. So if you actually want to come in, you can make your comment though. But if you're having difficulty, then you can just indicate it and I can read it out. But please feel free. Yes, you are recognized.
Thank you, Program Director. I hope you can hear me clearly. I've been battling with hay fever, so forgive me for all the typing.
No problem, no problem. It's good to have you in.
Thank you. So I think firstly, it really serves to mention what a great presentation. And I just thought of, in terms of coordination, whether at the local or provincial level, it might be useful to explore the district municipal disaster management contacts, and on a very regular basis, example, the West Coast District Municipality, they would convene their partners and look at level of preparedness and planning in terms of oil spills and so on. So yeah, just thought I'd capture a comment there. And once again, apologies for the voice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albertus. Okay, let's see. So your hand, so you've been covered because your hand is still up. Okay, cool.
Can I respond?
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. We were also referred to the local district disaster risk planning and management coordination bodies. This would help greatly for the management of disasters inland, especially for provinces like the Western Cape, where Heritage Western Cape is fully competent. They can start developing at a provincial also level risk management tools for any heritage sites. But the maritime space is actually managed at a national level. And currently the response time for the responses and the planning methods are handled at a national level. And to date, I'm still waiting to be included as SARA, as a representative of SARA for Heritage, into the planning and coordination bodies for the maritime space itself, so that we could start having these discussions of including heritage, because we do have a significant amount of heritage on our coasts that needs to be included within the planning phases, as well as whatever response is planned, so that we also know actually what it's meant by response in the other coordinating bodies planning measures, because we do not want to see an instance where the proposed responses would further impact on heritage, and maybe also just to see if there could just be conversations around what is mitigating disaster for heritage in South Africa as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Sabella. Then I actually missed it in the comments. That's by our senior manager, Mr. Benoit Singer. So it's a comment as well to you, Sabella, and this is what he says, is that this model that you presented now provides a methodology that goes beyond oil spills and can and should be replicated at all levels of heritage management and in all site management plans, a necessary step towards building increased resilience against disasters. The inclusion of IKS is commendable. Thank you, Mr. Mosinga. Then is there any other questions or from the floor, or comments, or that anyone wants to perhaps add? Okay, then with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, everybody gathered, I would like to thank you all for joining in today, which was day 2. I think it was very fruitful and it was very engaging as everyone has contributed. Again, I'm just glad I didn't speak alone and that it was just my voice, so I'm happy for that. And then also tomorrow, please do tune in again. Our engagements does not stop here. Tomorrow, you won't necessarily see my face on the screen, but I certainly will be in and I will also be listening. And day 3 will be on, it will have an international feel and it will speak to case studies on both the African continent as well as around the globe. And the topic for that day is restitution of cultural artifacts to countries of origin, solidarity in restoring the cultural heritage of descendant communities. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, is my manager, Mr. Mosinga, my senior manager, he's with us now and he wants to say something.
Thank you so much, Program Director. To all our guests online, I would now like to invite you to please switch on your microphones. So you have heard me correctly. Please turn on your microphones. And please give a very big round of applause to our lovely Program Director, Mr. Robin George, and our wonderful speakers from today.
Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.